Hey everyone, welcome to the Stephen King tier list, something I've been very excited to do since starting this channel. There were just a few books I wanted to read first. So today we're going to be taking a look at every single Stephen King book I have read and ranking them on a tier list. Going to be going over them in chronological order, and I'm counting all of his main novels and novellas, separate from the collections they were released in, because I don't really like, ranking the collections all as a whole when they're made up of multiple different stories. However, I won't be counting the short stories because those are usually too short for me to feel comfortable ranking them among the bigger ones. So let's take a look at the list here. We are going to be going in chronological order, and we have S through D here. Now, I have not read any King books that I would consider F tier. Hopefully I never do. You never know. And it's I'd say mostly S through B is going to have most of them. There are only a few that I would consider below a B tier. But either way, of course, S will be reserved for the best of the best, with A being, the really, really great ones, B being the good ones that, had a few things that held it back from being super great. C is the meh, the alright ones, and D are the ones I just straight up didn't like. So we're going to be starting things off with King's first published novel, Carrie. Now, Carrie is a really cool little book. I like it a lot. It's told in a very unique way. I really like how, we have the, flash forwards, the retrospective, articles and interviews and stuff about the event. All while the suspense is building in the present timeline of, how this is actually going to go down. I think that'll be a safe B tier. It's very brief and short, so I don't really consider it to be one of his better novels, but it was definitely still very impressive for the first one. Also going to shout out the original movie from the 70s, which is pretty awesome. Now, as for Salem's Lot, this is going right up into S tier, man. I absolutely love this book. And it's even more impressive with just how early in his career he put this out. It's like a classic vampire story that takes place in this creepy little small town. There are so many well-developed characters. This was really the start of a lot of the classic Stephen King tropes we know and the stuff that he does just so well. And it all culminates in an absolutely amazing climax. And yeah, Salem's Lot, definitely one of my favorites. Gary Doberman is going to take a crack at making a new movie for it, so we'll see how that turns out. I am optimistic, but a little bit cautious. Next up is The Shining. I mean, come on, man. Classic, absolute classic Stephen King. I'm going to also put this up into S tier. The atmosphere with this one, the Overlook Hotel, the isolation. It's so good, and it's really, really creepy too, with all the spooky stuff going on. This was actually my first Stephen King book, and I definitely found it to be a good place to start. I also really love Kubrick's film, even though, it is not a great adaptation of the book. It's still awesome, and I really, really love The Shining as well. The Dead Zone. Ooh, another really fantastic one. I think I'm also going to put this in S. Yeah, The Dead Zone is really fantastic as well. I mean, King was just really popping off in the 70s. A lot of his first books were really, really fantastic and some of his best he's ever written. But yeah, The Dead Zone is just such an interesting book, of course, following our main character who, has visions of the future and, what he decides to do after he knows what's happening. And there are multiple, mini story arcs that take place throughout this book, putting him in different scenarios, and I think they're all absolutely fantastic, especially the last one, which they had been building up the whole book, and it really, really left an impact on me. Really great stuff. The Christopher Walken movie was pretty good too. Firestarter. I really, really enjoy Firestarter. I think it's one of his more underrated books from this era. But yeah, I think it's so great and really influential as well. There are so many things that have taken stuff from Firestarter. And yeah, I don't often think it gets the credit it deserves. Probably because both of its adaptations, especially the new one, have not been that great. But yeah, really great story about a father and daughter with special powers and the government trying to track them down. It takes some really interesting twists and turns, and I really like how it all wraps up in the end. Seems like we have now come to our first Dark Tower book, The Gunslinger. Now, I don't know how controversial this will be. I mean, I think, any ranking of the Dark Tower is controversial because people have wildly different opinions of it. But I actually don't care for The Gunslinger all that much. I think it's definitely the weakest of the Dark Tower books, and not one I particularly enjoyed. I just found it to be pretty hard to get into. You know, it's a very odd book, a lot of weird stuff happening, and I don't really think there was enough setup in this one book to justify a lot of the stuff that we're doing here. It still does have some great stuff. Of course, Roland is a great character, and his interactions with the Man in Black and even Jake were great. Like, they really were. There's definite highlights of this book. But overall, I definitely think it could have been a much stronger start to the series. I'll say this, though. If you've read this book and were hesitant about continuing the series, don't be. And we'll get into why. Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Of course, another absolute classic. Gonna stick this one up into A. It might have been S tier if not for the fact that I think that the film from Frank Darabont is, like, way better. It doesn't really fix anything in the book because the book is so solid, but it just adds so much more to it and makes it like a much more compelling story. But I really don't want that to take away from the book because the book is also very, very good. But again, it's pretty short and very fast paced. But yeah, again, fantastic story about Mr. Dufresne, who is, framed of his wife's murder, has to go to Shawshank, and of course, what happens to him there. If you've not experienced it yet, you gotta get on that. It's a banger. Apt Pupil, alright, Apt Pupil. Very, very dark and disturbing book. I talked about this in a recent video, but of course, a boy learns that there's an SS officer in his neighborhood, and instead of doing the right thing and turning him in, he starts to sort of go crazy along with him. Ton of suspense, very, very wild, and I honestly think it's very fun. So we're going to put it in B. It's not like I'd say top tier King, definitely not his best of this era, but it's a solid little book. And yeah, if you're looking for some freaky stuff to read, this would definitely be a fun one. The Body. Ooh, I like The Body. I don't love it. It's like a good story about friendship and stuff. It has a few interesting, unique aspects to it. And the movie, of course, Stand By Me, is a classic and pretty good as well. But I think I'm going to put it under Apt Pupil a bit. It didn't really leave a huge impact on me. The Breathing Method. A bit of a hot take. Definitely a hot take. I adore The Breathing Method. I think this one is actually S tier. I love it. It's probably the shortest thing on this list. It's a pretty brief novella about like this gentleman's club type thing who get together and tell stories. And I love the mythology here and the mystery of what this gentleman's club is. And of course it all builds up to the story that they tell, the breathing method, which I don't know what it is about this story, but it really, really stuck with me. And it has probably the single most terrifying thing I think I've read in a Stephen King book. People who've read it might not agree, but yeah, for me, that one just really shook me. And it really, man. The Breathing Method is absolutely fantastic. And with the only one without an adaptation, I definitely think it is the most underrated of the different seasons novellas. Pet Sematary is gonna be another S tier, man. Pet Sematary, I mean, what can I say about it? It definitely has a reputation of being King's probably scariest work, and I would not disagree. This one is just absolutely terrifying from its premise to this, creepy little Indian burial ground. After their pet cat tragically gets hit by a car, our main character goes to bury it here, and let's just say some disturbing things happen. Now, of course, a very famous story, made even more famous by both of its adaptations, both of which I don't actually think are very good at capturing, the pure terror of the book. But it's an absolute achievement, and the way it deals with, themes of grief and loss, it's just so visceral and intense. It's just really brilliant and definitely among his best. Cycle of the Werewolf. This is an interesting little novella, but not one that particularly stuck with me. I'll probably stick it in the C. It's a cool idea, each chapter is a different month of the year, and, each time we follow, this werewolf, and, eventually we find out who the werewolf is. It's a fun, nifty little book if you're looking for a quick read, although, not one of his essentials, I would say. I do like it a bit more than the movie, though, Silver Bullet. Not too big on that one. The Eyes of the Dragon is going to be another C book, I think. This is a YA fantasy, actually, and it, It definitely shows. It's about a prince who was accused of murdering the king and his imprisonment and, what happens to him, how he plans to escape. And I think that aspect of the book is actually really good, and I was really, really hooked on it. Like, I read like half of this book in one sitting. And it was really awesome seeing another popular Stephen King character show up in this one. But it was really the second half and just like all the other characters outside of the prison that really bogged this one down. I thought later parts of this book were a real slog to get through, and it's more simple YA approach to storytelling really held it back in my opinion. The Mist. Oh, The Mist is good. Oh, The Mist is good. Oh man. I might stick that one here. The Mist is absolutely amazing. Another just intense, claustrophobic thriller. All these people trapped inside a supermarket as this mysterious mist descends upon their town. It's fast-paced, it is terrifying, it is classic King at its best. And the movie, which Frank Darabont also did, I thought is wonderful. Although the ending is, it's not the ending of the book. We'll say that. It's a bit, I don't know if I prefer this ending over the book ending, but it's very different. Let me say. It's, it. What a book. Well, what else can I say about this one? Probably his most famous book, I would say. I mean, everyone knows the story of those kids in Derry and their struggle against Pennywise. And I think I'm going to put it in A tier. Yeah, it's a massive, massive book. And, it's very epic in the way it's told. Constantly jumping forth between the past and the present as, we piece together what happened to all of these people when they were kids. And it's scary, too. Like, Pennywise is just such a creepy villain who can, transform to match the fears of, anyone who comes into contact with him. It's just a really, really solid, well-told story. Now, there are a few elements. I mean, of course, we all know that infamous scene in the sewers, and yes, it is creepy and bad and did not need to be there. There's also another scene people don't talk about much involving some, But at the end of the day, like, these make up only like a handful of pages out of this 1,000-page epic, and so it doesn't bother me too much, but yeah, that is one of the things that I feel keeps it back from an S tier for me. When it comes to the movies, like, the 90s one is not great, but it's fine. And while the new ones, while they don't really follow the book very well, I think he does a good job, mostly in part 1, nailing just the atmosphere and the vibes of the book. I really like that movie. Part 2, not so much. I don't know. I still don't feel like it has an essential adaptation yet. I don't know if we will ever get one, but it is what it is. Now, remember how I said if you weren't enjoying The Gunslinger that much, you should still keep at it? Bammo, baby. The drawing of the 3 is fantastic. What a turnaround, man. This book really takes the Dark Tower to new heights and starts to shape it into what it would become. We again follow Roland on a beach. He's on the beach for most of the book, as he comes across these doors, these peeks into other worlds, where we meet our other main characters for the Dark Tower series, Eddie and Susanna. And it is absolutely thrilling and crazy, with a lot of exciting action, some great character moments, and definitely got me hooked on the Dark Tower as a whole. Oh, the Misery. Yeah, Misery's amazing. Another absolutely essential S-tier King. It's actually funny because he made this sort of as a response to people who didn't like The Eyes of the Dragon. So if there's one really good thing The Eyes of the Dragon did, it gave us Misery. Of course, an author is basically kidnapped by one of his crazy fans and is forced to write an ending that they want, which is still just a wild story that you can really see happening in real life, and it is pretty scary because there are definitely some crazy fans out there. It's very intense, very claustrophobic, probably more than anything else I've read out of here. It's just a great look at some fears that King may have as a famous writer. The movie is also fantastic, definitely one of the best King adaptations. The Stand, complete and uncut edition. Yes, the original edition did come out in the 70s, but when the 90s came around, King went back to it, spruced it up a bit, and in my opinion, gave us his best book ever. The Stand is absolutely incredible in every way. The story of a pandemic which wipes out the entire planet almost. I've read this book like literally when COVID was starting, so it was a bit freaky. But yeah, a good bit of this book focuses on the pandemic and all of its wreckage. And we focus on all these different POVs of these people who were immune, survivors of the pandemic, and how they slowly start to congregate and form a new society in this new world. But they aren't the only ones doing this, and those other people people may not have the best of intentions. Easily King's most epic work. I mean, there's just so much to it. And he really nails pretty much every aspect. I'm pretty sure the uncut edition is the only one they sell now. But like reading it, like I don't know what they could have cut from it because it all felt super important and super meaningful. This is a book I really wanted to never end, and yeah, it absolutely floored me. Not only is it my favorite King book, but it's definitely one of my favorite books of all time. And I think it has yet to really get the adaptation it deserves. The third Dark Tower book, The Wastelands, another absolute banger. I don't think I like this one as much as The Drawing of the Three, but it is still very, very good. And this is really sort of what establishes the Dark Tower as what it is, which is, you know, a fantasy adventure story. But it's not your grandpa's fantasy. This has a very, very unique style to it. There really is nothing like the Dark Tower, but it is still a fantastic story, and the bond between these characters that starts to form definitely makes you fall in love with them. And they make up one of my favorite ensemble casts ever. I should mention at this point the movie that came out a few years ago, it's absolute garbage. It's really like, I don't know what they were thinking there. To combine this like giant 8-volume series into a single 90-minute movie, I don't know, man. But with Mike Flanagan now in the process of making his own Dark Tower series, who has made great King movies in the past, I think it's in good hands, so I have a lot of hope that we will see the Dark Tower adapted the way that it was meant to be. And this brings us to Wizard and Glass, a very divisive book. I used to think that this was like the most highly rated book of the series, but I'm starting to think I was wrong there, because, and it's a bold choice, because this book is the longest in the series, and almost the entire book does not move the plot forward at all. It's just a backstory book. But I gotta say, man, I do think this is the best one. Where do I put it? I think I am gonna put it a little bit above The Shining. Man, I just love this world that King has created. Like the Dark Tower is so weird and wild, but in this one we sort of go back to a more traditional fantasy setting. And we see Roland as a young and stupid kid, and his adventures with his friends I just found to be absolutely delightful. And it was dark too. There's all this sinister, creepy magic, and it really makes you appreciate Roland's character more knowing the stuff that he has gone through. And the like 10% of the book that does move this plot forward, I also found to be just fantastic, with a really cool connection to another one of King's books. It would probably need to be done differently when it comes to adapting the series though, and I might make like a separate video on how I think Mike should adapt it. But yeah, overall, absolutely love Wizard and Glass. Now, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is an interesting little book about this little girl who essentially gets herself lost in the woods, and it's a survival story with someone who doesn't really know many survival skills. In that way, it's probably one of the more realistic horrors that King deals with here. So yeah, it can be a bit hard to read at times, but overall I do enjoy this book quite a bit. Again, it's pretty short, it's pretty brief, so it never left a huge impact on me. I know a lot of people like consider this one of their favorites. But yeah, it was still a really solid one that I would definitely recommend if you're looking for something a little different from King. Also, if you stretch really hard, there's like a connection with this book and another one of his books, which I think is very, very cool, and I hope it was intentional, because And now The Wolves of the Kala, the fifth Dark Tower book, another one I think is absolutely fantastic. In fact, I might... Ooh, this will be hard. I might actually put this above Drawing of the Three. I think this book is great. It was probably a breath of fresh air for people who didn't like The Wizard and Glass so much, because we get this huge book here just focusing on our core cast and this big struggle they come across on their journey to the Dark Tower. And it's just so great and so much fun. A lot of action in this one, a lot of great character moments, and some pretty surprising stuff if you are well read in other King books, as it really starts to set up a lot of just the insanity that we're about to see in the series. The sixth book is The Song of Susanna. Now this one, I found this one to be a bit more weaker of a Dark Tower book. I did think I still like it more than The Gunslinger, because we're still following all these characters I love. But the main problem with this one is that it really sort of just feels like a prologue to the final volume, as it is one of the shorter ones and doesn't really do all that much besides like a few key things. But those key things are pretty great in this one. If you are unaware about like where the Dark Tower goes, like Like, I've talked about how crazy and wild it is before. The Song of Susanna brings it truly to a new level. Like, the turns the series takes in this book are absolutely insane, and I never would have predicted them in a million years. So overall, yeah, still a pretty good book, just not one I would consider among the best of the Dark Tower. And then we come to the final volume, which may be the most polarizing of them all. As you would expect, it's a weird book. It goes in multiple weird directions. But I really think it is the culmination of everything that has happened, and we're given like one last fantastic adventure with all of these great characters. And for the most part, I really did enjoy where things ended up. I know the ending, a big point of contention for a lot of people, but I thought it was really fitting and worked really, really well. So I actually think this is my second favorite of the entire series. I absolutely loved this book, and I thought it was a really satisfying, it won't be satisfying for everyone, but for me personally, it was definitely a great end to the series. Under the Dome, one I just reviewed, so not much to say. I think this was a pretty solid B tier, I think. Might put it here, I'd say. Yeah, really enjoyable book. There were a lot of things, especially some pacing issues that brought it down. Of course, it's so long, and it really didn't need to be. But overall, I think it's a really great survival story of just this town descending into chaos. Then King was like, surprise, here's another Dark Tower book. And it's mostly just a collection of short stories that Roland is telling the Quartet. It takes place in between, I think, Wizard of Glass and Wolves of the Kala. And yeah, it's a fun book. There's not much to it. Again, it's more of like a side book that really doesn't do anything to the plot, because the plot was already over. So I'm probably going to put it just above Song of Susanna. But yeah, it was definitely a nice book for fans of the series, and I don't have much to complain about. Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, which came out many, many years later. And it's not really a traditional sequel that is dealing with a lot of the same things as the original. It's a very different book. Of course, follows Danny Torrance. Years later, he has sort of become an alcoholic like his father and is trying to break that trend, while also having to deal with some freaky demon guys who are hunting people who have The Shining. And yeah, overall, I thought this was a really, really solid one. Definitely not at the peak of The Shining, but it was different, and I really appreciated that about it. Now, there were a few things in the plot that made me roll my eyes a bit, definitely kept me from putting it in A tier, but I still really enjoyed it, though I do think that Mike Flanagan's movie is definitely an improvement over the book. I thought what he was able to do there, by like being a continuation to the Kubrick film, but also, honoring the original book of The Shining, I thought it was just fantastic. Really, really great stuff. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited to see him do The Dark Tower. Speaking of Mike, he was also going to turn Revival into a movie, but because people were stupid and didn't go see Dr. Sleep in theaters, it ended up not being that successful, so he didn't end up doing Revival, which is a shame, because I actually really love Revival. Story that spans like multiple decades, following our main character as he is constantly crossing paths with a preacher from his childhood, who has been known to dabble in some interesting experiments involving electricity. And I just found this to be a very engaging book. I loved following our main character and all of his adventures over the years. I know some people think this ending is goofy and over the top and stupid, and some people think it's the scariest shit they've ever read. I not only love this ending, but do think it is one of the freakiest things I have read from King. It really fills you with this insane, existential, cosmic dread that nothing else from him has really matched for me. Yeah, this is a really, really solid one. And now The Outsider. This is an interesting one. I think, like, the first half of it is absolutely fantastic. Yes, someone is accused of the gruesome murder of a child in this town, and the police have definitive evidence, so they go and book his ass. But then more evidence shows up, placing this guy somewhere else when the murder was being committed, and it leads into this very interesting and twisty supernatural mystery. They call in Holly Gibney from the Mr. Mercedes trilogy to come help, and this was my first introduction to her, and I thought she was a fantastic character. And now, I still really enjoyed the second half of the book, but I think a lot of the mystery and suspense was sort of lost once you actually find out what's going on, and then it just becomes a bit more standard by the numbers King, which is still very good, but does keep it from being one of my favorites. However, it's still really, really solid. I also really liked the HBO show they turned this one into. Big fan of Jason Bateman. What a guy. Elevation, one I reviewed recently on this channel, and yeah. I don't even know why this is here. It should have been a short story, man. There's just nothing to this. It's like, here's an interesting sci-fi premise. We're not going to do anything with it. We're going to focus on this story with the Mexican restaurant. Just really forgettable, and I don't get it. Later is about a boy who can talk to dead people. But some dead people you probably shouldn't mess with. And that's what this kid learns very quickly. I remember this was the first like book I bought during COVID, and I had to go to the store. They had to like come out and put it in my trunk because we weren't allowed inside. But yeah, I think this book is absolutely delightful. I really, really enjoy Later. It's definitely a shorter one, and because of that, it's very fast-paced. But I thought the premise was, while it had been done before, it was still super interesting the way he went about it. I thought our main character, who was just a kid, but he was written in such a good and relatable way. But man, there are some stuff in this book that I was not expecting. As, at this point, I was pretty well-read, and like... Yes, there was a very shocking connection to another one of his books that completely caught me off guard, and really, really made this even more memorable than it already was. And our last book here is Fairy Tail, another one I just reviewed, and it was pretty solid, though definitely not one of King's better books. In fact, I'd probably actually stick it at the bottom of B. Again, I want to emphasize it was a good book, and especially the first half of this book I thought was fantastic. It's just, all the fantasy stuff, I think it could have been developed a lot more. But with that being said, here is our list, and it's not too shabby. As you can tell, I am still quite a large King fan, with only 4 books of him coming under a B, and these weren't even terrible books that I hated reading. Yeah, just a lot of really, really solid stories here, going up to, some of the best stories I've ever read. If you're looking for a place to start, I made a video on that recently, which I would recommend checking out. These are my favorites. These are my least favorites. I'm excited to be reading a lot more of him this year, and hopefully at some point we will be able to go back to this, rearrange some things, and add a lot more to them. So with that, thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on anything Stephen King related in the comments down below, and I will see you all for, where's the next one? Don't Fear the Reaper, baby. That's the next review. Whew, I'm excited.